our client's affidavit, as well as other supporting affidavits, as well as I'm sure that Mr. Miller and his attorney were too. However, under the circumstances, we decided to enter into this agreement. One of the primary issues that we were seeking a court order
She's
from
speaking out
the
from the
judge
grave
is possession of Mica's.
for those that are battling domestic violence or battling whatever, whether it be a narcissist talking down or whether it's physical abuse, mental abuse. She's opening up a can of worms to bring awareness.
I mean, I am a person of faith. I am a Christian, and that what he's describing is not the faith that I'm familiar with. The things that he said about his wife, the weaponizing the ability to forgive and reconcile, and weaponizing that against victims, true victims. And instead of supporting victims, we are attacking victims, telling them, that they need to forgive and reconcile with their abuser is a tragic miscalculation that many people of faith use. I see it regularly, and it's dangerous. It is absolutely dangerous because the only people that can stop abuse are abusers. Victims are not responsible for that, and so often we place the focus on the victim being able to stop the chaos, stop the madness, and the onus is not on them. It is on the offender, and we need to call that out. And what he's doing it's disgusting. It really, really is. And for him to talk about, from knowing everything, he's told the congregation a week, 2 weeks, whenever that was previous, that she left, that she had mental health issues, all of this, talking so disparagingly against his own wife, and then to talk, about her in this eulogy, in this glowing way, and that he's the true victim. Even at that point, a lot of stuff had come out, that these text messages and things had come out, that people were aware of that, and he's still playing the victim. He's still playing that fiddle, and it's absolutely disgusting. And really, people need to be held accountable for ignoring the warning sign.
On May 4th, the Christian Post interviewed Charles, I don't beat my wife, Randall, regarding Mica's death. And the following is an excerpt from that article. Quote, "The Reverend Charles Randall, Pastor Miller's spiritual advisor and mentor, told Christian Post that, basically, social media is very wicked in saying things and lying about the situation, things that they are not aware of. He said he has known Miller for a long time and was one of his teachers in high school. He also said he had been counseling Mica and Pastor Miller since September 2023 and was not aware of any abuse. He acknowledged that there was a little bump in the road during efforts to restore their marriage, but did not disclose what that bump was. I live by the Holy Spirit of God. If God would lead me to remove him, I will do that. It has not happened at this time. As far as abuse, they are lying about that. There was no abuse."
What difference will federal involvement make? It turns out federal authorities do have jurisdiction in local investigations when a federal witness is murdered to prevent them from testifying. Wait a minute. Didn't Mica report JP to the feds shortly before her death? And wouldn't that make her a federal witness?
I just want my family to know where to find me.
At 1:38 p.m., Mica Miller leaves the gas station, and she does something really interesting. She circles the gas station. From there, she heads to Lumber River State Park, and at 2:54 p.m., she calls 911, and then her life has ended. At 3:31 p.m., police arrive. Then at 4:23 p.m., Mica's body is found with markings on her hand, and it looks like someone has grabbed her forearm.
discussing things of stalking and obsession, and I've had stalkers. I deal with this. I'm dealing with situations, and it gets very complicated, and we don't, because we're not having these conversations out there. But now we're starting to, where we're recognizing these behavioral patterns and starting to discuss how people can, in fact, protect themselves from these situations, whether they're female or male, and
Absolutely.
protect their families. If someone like Mica had come to you, what is it that you suggest as a course of action for them if they're feeling like there's no way out?
So one of the first things that we always do is we will go through safety planning with the victim, with our client. Our entire staff, we have victims' rights attorneys, but we also have certified victim advocates who are all trained into helping a victim figure out a safety plan. Sometimes that safety plan is not leaving immediately. Sometimes it is planning to do that. Sometimes it's getting out right then and there, getting them into a shelter, getting them into, a hotel, 5 towns away. There are lots of different things. But, making sure that they are physically safe, that they and their family, their children are safe. If there are, if law enforcement is already involved, it's something that we definitely jump right into, making sure there's some sort of protective order, there's a no contact order, and that it is upheld, making sure that any violation, law enforcement is involved in that, and that we pursue every avenue to keep victims safe and offenders held accountable. She was in the midst of a divorce here. There are motions that can be filed in the family court context that can protect her and protect, if she had any minor children or her family from being harassed, as looks like he certainly did.
Dead, Mica filed once more and, according to friends, also sought a no-contact order against her husband. Today, her haunting Facebook posts reveal the inner conflict with which Mica had wrestled before making her decision to leave, as she sought to square her religious convictions with the prospect of divorce. But she seemed finally to have done so. Speaking March 22nd, she said, "You don't have to stay in an abusive relationship, whether that's sexual, whether it's someone forcing you to take illegal drugs or alcohol abuse and all this stuff we just saw on the video, right?"
There's situations where you think this makes no sense. Why is this so hard for victims? Why is it so hard for them to protect themselves? Why do we see that, law enforcement didn't do anything? And I'm not trying to, bust the balls of law enforcement here, but we just see so often that things are not taken as seriously as they could have been or should have been.
Private investigator tracking her. We don't know if this PI even hired his own group of stalkers. Stealing her cell phone, stealing her laptop, stealing her notary stamp, sabotaging her missions ministry, tried to set her up and frame her for missing money out of a ministry account, constant relentless texts, emails, incorporating the assistance of the elders from the church, forced hospitalization, forced medication, gaslighting her into believing she needed this medication and that she was actually mentally ill. There were ignored complaints by Mica to the elders and law enforcement, violating her by putting intimate photos of her on the internet, pushing a false narrative against her as mentally ill.
I need my medication, and he would not bring it to her. He got it out and didn't tell her. He picked it up, didn't give it to her, kept it from her, went to sleep anyway while she was waiting to try to meet him to get some.
There are a lot of warning signs here that could have and should have stopped what happened from happening. And I keep saying it's tragic, but it absolutely is tragic. But these things, they can be preventable if we know what to do, if we know the resources that are out there. We know, ways that victims can be helped, because there are ways to get victims out of these relationships in a safe place where they can be away from their abuser and can hopefully thrive. But this is just awful situation.
So when you were in the prosecutor's office, you said you were there for 8 years, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was most of your work geared towards going after offenders like this, like her husband, John Paul?
The the majority of my caseload involved domestic violence and sexual assault cases, prosecuting homicides involving, marital relationships, crimes against women and children is where my focus was. And so the work that I do as a victims' rights attorney is really an extension of that, just working to represent the victim and protect their rights, make sure that they have the ability to get restraining orders, that they are meaningful when, an abuser is, stalking them, that we pursue every avenue to help make sure that they're held accountable, that law enforcement takes these things seriously.
Died has always been about what makes more sense. Do we believe the pastor who's been accused of being with multiple children and has text messages saying that he has dated 14-year-old girls? Do we believe the man who's had an affair with prostitutes and posted nude photos of his wife? A man who went into a rage after finding out that his wife was with another man, moving on with her life, and then he allegedly slashed her tires multiple times. A man who claims he hired a PI to prevent his wife from purchasing a weapon, yet she did exactly just that.
Show me a way out. So, I want to remind you, like a bunch of people have been reminding me lately, that I'm God's bride first. And even an earthly spouse, who's a good spouse, when they know that their bride is being hurt, just imagine what an earthly spouse does. What do you think your heavenly...
A lot of people, hey, sir. A lot of people want to know if you murdered your wife. He only unto her so long as you both shall live.
A man who insulted his wife on a regular basis from the pulpit. A man who has offered multiple people $10,000 to convince Mica to come back. Oh, yes, I know. A man who spent church funds to find out about a woman's rape. A man who hit a woman not once but twice with his vehicle. A man who claims that he's trying to protect his wife from these mental episodes, but in
behavior did not match what would be a true love. He is the kind of person that tries to buy love, and he expects loyalty. And if he does you a favor, he expects reciprocation. Nothing ever comes from him without a price.
Yeah, we had seen some video of him that she recorded of the two of them having a bit of a confrontation at a truck stop. There was allegations as well that he posted some pictures of her, private pictures of her online that might have showed her topless, and then took it down a few hours later. But is it, I mean, if that could be construed as revenge porn. You can't do that to people.
And knowledge is power. And sometimes people aren't ready to leave. As I said earlier, so often it takes years for them to leave an abusive relationship. But knowing the things that they can do, keeping a log of, whether it's financial abuse, coercive control, texting, the triangulation of, talking to this person and then talking to that person and trying to manipulate this,
splitting of information is a big one too, where they split things and weaponize. Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially, if they're separated, playing the children.
Now, gang stalking is a systemic campaign of harassment deliberately carried out by a group against an individual, aiming to isolate and intimidate through disruptive tactics. Now, why is this important at this moment? A lot of reports are coming out that on the day of her death, she had been stalked, gang stalked. And to prove that, we need to prove it's been happening all along, which we can. That's the point that's being made here, okay? So bear with me. Disruptive tactics are like surveillance, for example. Surveillance can be tracking devices put on her car. There's also one where, let's say when he had her laptop, you can install programs, malware, to where remotely you'd be able to watch then when she gets the laptop back, what she's typing, what password she's putting in, who she's speaking to, who's emailing her, who she's emailing, and all that kind of information.
The stories that she had been telling me and how rough things had been for her, I just didn't want a confrontation with John Paul.
But here's the interesting part of it all. John Paul Miller wasn't driving the blue Ford F-150 that we've all come to know. He was driving a dark, charcoal F-150. So everyone's been focused on the blue truck, even Robinson County Sheriff's Department. But you were really the first one to come to me and say he didn't drive a blue truck. He drove this dark gray Ford F-150. And we've all seen the surveillance footage, and there is a dark Ford F-150 circling the gas station parking lot multiple times. And though we don't know if that's the truck that John Paul owns, but what do you think? Do you think that could be the truck?
I definitely had that feeling. I had a very strong feeling about that from the beginning. I brought it to several people. Everybody kind of dismissed it. Everybody was talking about a blue truck. I wasn't even aware, like I said, John.
Mary says 4 times. He was very possessive over her body after her death too. It's so weird.
According to gangstalkingworld.com, there is a petition out to the U.S. Supreme Court to stop all types of group stalking, no matter who hires them, even if it's the feds or the military. They say organized stalking is a form of terrorism. It's used against an individual in a malicious attempt to reduce the quality of that person's life. This is done by well-orchestrated surveillance, rumors, lies, bogus investigations, setups and framings, intimidation, overt and covert threats, vandalism, theft, sabotage, humiliation, emotional terror, and general harassment through ganging up on the target. Potential reasons for a group stalking, according to this website, is to torture the target, to leech off the target monetarily, to attempt control of the target, to reduce the quality of life of the target, to drive the target insane, and to ultimately kill the target, either through pushing them to unalive themselves or by other means, which would be murder. Usually the people who hire these group stalkers are known as the FBI, private investigators, not all private investigators, military, and law enforcement. Not all law enforcement, but law enforcement has been known to use group stalking. And in some cases, private individuals. This is according to a 2009 article from the U.S. Department of Justice and a 2012 article from the National Center for Victims Crime Stalking Fact Sheet. Okay. JP to Mica. So what has he done throughout the years to her to prove that this was most likely possible what happened to her on the day of her death? Tracking devices on her cars, vandalizes her tires, keyed her car, JP's son following her. We hear her say that in the 911 call. Private investigator tracking her. We don't know if this PI even hired his own group of stalkers. Stealing her cell phone, stealing her laptop, stealing her notary stamp, sabotaging her missions ministry, tried to set her up and frame her for missing money out of a ministry account, constant relentless texts, emails, incorporating the assistance of the elders from the church, forced hospitalization, forced medication, gaslighting her into believing she needed this medication and that she was actually meant
A little better. Today, we're starting with Charles Randall. Charles, I don't beat my wife, Randall, was born July 4th, 1951, to James T. and Ollie Mae Bellamy Randall in Little River, South Carolina. Little River, South Carolina had a population of 11,711 in 2020, but had dwindled to 9,815 in 2022. I would guess that COVID had a lot to do with the rapid loss of people. Little River is located on the North Carolina border and is in the same county as Myrtle Beach. According to Wikipedia, the area is mainly made up of housing developments, old scrub pine forest, marshes, and swamps, and is bordered by the Waccamaw River and the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway. Charles married Doretha in 1974, and the couple have 2 daughters. Maybe I should explain why I gave Charles his nickname. When he ran for South Carolina House of Representatives in 2012, there was a bio page about Charles, and he felt the need to point out that there was never any physical or verbal abuse between he and his wife. So the bio states, talking about Charles and Doretha, in 38 years, there has never been one instance of physical or mental abuse between them. Now, I don't know about you, but I have never felt the need to introduce myself and then go on to explain that I've never killed anyone with a baseball bat.
This is not something people don't want to talk about this at dinner table. They don't want to talk about, coercive control, domestic violence, thinking, I'm in the grocery store and, there are people standing here in this line with me who are statistically victims of domestic violence. People don't want to think about that, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. And it's important to have these discussions. It really is.
I agree. And, you mentioned law enforcement and sort of law enforcement's responses to this. Is it because there's just a sort of maybe even an anachronistic way of looking at it for them that they haven't caught up to the times? Maybe it's even technology. You mentioned earlier in the program the cyberbullying that occurs with students, and there's been a lot of cases that has come forward in the justice system in this country with cyberbullying and things of that nature. But this is showing, cyberbullying on a different, cyber DV, if you will, and
right.
And that control. Is it that law enforcement just needs to sort of catch up to the times, or is it that sometimes they just turn a blind eye, or they're just overwhelmed? What is that?
I think it's a combination of all those things. It is, not being trained on the latest, technology. People are able to, get on Google, get a phone number, and call and harass an individual. And there's, they think that there's no way to be able to trace that or track that. Well, there are certain things that law enforcement can do to be able to track that, be able to connect the dots, to get good evidence, to be able to show that pattern of abusive and harassing behavior. So I think it's, not being trained, being overwhelmed. The workload of law enforcement, prosecutors, our courts, it's overwhelming. I think that sometimes people are burnt out. These cases are difficult. They are hard. And you're dealing with victims day in and day out. It can be overwhelming. And I think for some people, it can become just normalized, but it's not normal. It's, something that I talk about with our staff and I think about regularly is that, when I work with a victim, when I work with a client, they're not just a client, they're a person. And what the story that they're sharing with me, their experiences, it's the most important thing that is going on in their life. And while I might meet with 4 different victims today, I want to give the respect and attention to each of those individuals because I want them to be able to get the resources they need, the assistance they need, and to help them do whatever it is that they give them choice in a situation that choice is taken from them by abusers daily. So it is incredibly important for people who have been victims of domestic violence to have choice and to have autonomy. And we try to give that to them. And, people burn out. I'm not using that as an excuse for law enforcement or for folks that do this work, but it's hard work. But I think that we have to to recognize those things in our communities, in our fields. In our staff, we take a mental health afternoon. Every staff member takes a mental health afternoon every month. No questions asked. We cannot be there for our clients and for victims in South Carolina if we're not taking care of ourselves. Vicarious trauma is real, and it is something that we can't be there for others if we're not there for ourselves. So we try to model the behavior that we want for our victims and survivors that we work with. And I think, if we're not seeing that modeled behavior with, people who were doing this work, it can be very difficult. So I wish I had a better answer for you, and that was my lawyer long-winded answer of like, why is this happening? I don't know. It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of crap. But none of it's an excuse.
We do have some questions. First one would be, how would you recommend dealing with behavior, dealing with a person who has exhibited abusive behavior towards you? Should you confront them? Should you try to share your side of the story? How do they protect themselves?
When dealing with a true abuser, I never suggest, trying to get them to quote unquote see your side of the story, because they're not ever going to be focused on that. Making sure that you are protected and safe is your number one and only job. And sometimes that is pacifying them, saying, you're right, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have answered the phone like that, or whatever the situation may be, until you can get in a safe space. So I never suggest confronting an abuser, because so often that leads to escalation, that leads to, threats of violence and actual violence. And so that is not something I ever encourage. There may be a time and a place for that down the road once there's been distance and, you're safely extricated from that relationship. But that's definitely not something that I encourage. So I think it's, not being trained, being overwhelmed. The workload of law enforcement, prosecutors, our courts, it's overwhelming. I think that sometimes people are burnt out. These cases are difficult. They are hard. And you're dealing with victims day in and day out. It can be overwhelming. And I think for some people, it can become just normalized, but it's not normal. It's, something that I talk about with our staff and I think about regularly is that, when I work with a victim, when I work with a client, they're not just a client, they're a person. And what the story that they're sharing with me, their experiences, it's the most important thing that is going on in their life. And while I might meet with 4 different victims today, I want to give the respect and attention to each of those individuals, because I want them to be able to get the resources they need, the assistance they need, and to help them do whatever it is that give them choice in a situation that choice is taken from them by abusers daily. So it is incredibly important for people who have been victims of domestic violence to have choice and to have autonomy. And we try to give that to them. And, people burn out. I'm not using that as an excuse for law enforcement or for folks that do this work, but it's hard work. But I think that we have to recognize those things in our communities, in our fields. In our staff, we take a mental health afternoon. Every staff member takes a mental health afternoon every month. No questions asked. We cannot be there for our clients and for victims in South Carolina if we're not taking care of ourselves. Vicarious trauma is real, and it is something that we can't be there for others if we're not there for ourselves. So we try to model the behavior that we want for our victims and survivors that we work with. And I think, if we're not seeing that modeled behavior with, people who were doing this work, it can be very difficult. So I wish I had a better answer for you, and that was my lawyer long-winded answer of like, why is this happening? I don't know. It's a
No.
lot of stuff. It's a lot of crap.
Recommend dealing with behavior, dealing with a person who has exhibited abusive behavior towards you. Should you confront them? Should you try to share your side of the story? How do they protect themselves?
When dealing with a true abuser, I never suggest, trying to get them to quote unquote see your side of the story, because they're not ever going to be focused on that. Making sure that you are protected and safe is your number one and only job. And sometimes that is pacifying them, saying, you're right, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have answered the phone like that, or whatever the situation may be, until you can get in a safe space. Because number one, your safety is the priority. Getting your story out, letting other people, I tell people, let other people think whatever it is they want to think. As long as you are safe, that you're protected, that is the most important thing. Absolutely. We've had very recently in Charlotte, North Carolina, just a couple hours away from where I live in South Carolina, officers were going to serve a warrant and were shot and killed. It was a domestic violence situation that just escalated, and lives were tragically lost. So, domestic violence is unpredictable. You're going into a heated situation between two individuals. Oftentimes law enforcement, they don't know who's the aggressor and who's not. They don't know, they may know that someone called. It could have been a neighbor, but they don't know what sort of situation they're walking into. And they are incredibly dangerous situations.
Where can our listeners find you?
So you can find me all on social media. I'm Sarah A. Ford, ESQ, on Twitter, on Instagram, all over. But you can also follow me at Step Toward Justice, where we tackle issues that we're talking about now, different cases, victim advocates, working with law enforcement. What do sane nurses do? People who work with victims of sexual assault, what can you expect? How can we help? How can we as a community be there for those that need us most? And those are the conversations we have over on my podcast.
And important
anybody ever has any questions or anything, I'm always happy to be a resource to help people in similar situations to find what they need to keep themselves safe.
Because you offer that first step towards justice.
The very first thing as you go into that new conversation is to go into it with belief. Believe that person. Because what if they tell you it's your brother who's doing the abusing? Or your pastor? Or the person at work that you really look up to and admire? Believe is the most important thing. That doesn't mean in a month you believe the same thing. People do lie. But it means in that moment you are believing. Because when somebody opens up to you and tells you this terrible thing that's happening in their lives, I want you to think of it as a present. They have given you this wonderful present of trust and faith that you are going to be there with them and help them. And it's one of those presents that's also a burden. It's super tough to help somebody in this situation, but it's a present. And if you take that present that they have given you and you throw it on the floor and you crush it with your foot and you say,